Chapter 2. Sastri had to go a little earlier than usual since he had to perform a puja at home. I hesitated to let him go.
The 3 color labels. I prided myself on the excellence of my color printing. For KJ's aerated drinks had to be readied. It was a piece of very serious work for me, although my personal view was that the colored ink I used on the label was safer for a drink than the tints that KJ let into his water-filled bottles. We had already printed the basic color on the labels, and the second was to be imposed today.
This was generally a crucial stage of work, and I wanted Sastri to stay on and finish the job. He said, "Perhaps I can stay up late tonight and finish it." "Not now."
"Meanwhile, will you?" He allotted me work until he should be back at 2 o'clock. I had been engrossed in a talk with the usual company.
Nehru's third 5-year plan was on the agenda today, and my friend Sain was seeing nothing but ruin in it for the country. 300 crores. Actually, are we counting heads or money? His audience consisted of myself and the poet and someone else who had come to ask for quotations for a business card.
The discussion was warming up, as the visiting card client was a congressman who had gone to prison 14 times since the day Mahatma Gandhi arrived in India from South Africa. He ignored for the time being the business that had brought him here and plunged into a debate, settling himself inexorably in a corner. "What's wrong with the people is you have got into the habit of blaming everything on the government.
You think that democracy means that if there is no sugar in the shop, government is responsible for it. What if there is no sugar? You won't die if you do not have sugar for your morning coffee some days."
Sain disputed every word of the patriot's speech. I listened to the debate until I noticed Sastri's silhouette beyond the curtain. Sastri, when there was any emergency, treated me as a handy boy. I had no alternative but to accept the role.
Now my duty would be to fix the block on the machine and put the second impression on all the labels and spread them out to dry, and then he would come and give the third impression and put out the labels to dry again. He explained some of the finer points. "The blocks are rather worn, you'll have to let in more ink." "Yes, Mr. Sastri."
He looked at me through his silver-rimmed small glasses and said firmly, "Unless the labels are second printed and dry by 3 o'clock today, it's going to be impossible to deliver them tomorrow. You know what kind of a man K.J is? What about my lunch?"
This man did not care whether I had time for food or not, a tyrant when it came to printing labels, no consideration of working conditions. But there was no way of protesting to him. He would brush everything aside.
As if reading my mind, he explained, "I'd not trouble you but for the fact that this Satyanarayana puja must be performed today in my house. My children and wife will be looking for me at the door." He'd have to trot all the way to Vinayak Street if his family was not to starve too long.
Wife, children. Absurd, I felt. Such encumbrances were not necessary for Sastri. They were for lesser men like me.
His place was at the typeboard and the treadle. He produced an incongruous, unconvincing picture as a family man. But I dared not express myself aloud.
The relationship of employer and employee was getting reversed now and then, whenever there was an emergency. I accepted it without any fuss. According to house custom, my friends would not step beyond the curtain, so I was safe to go ahead with the second impression.
Sastri had fixed everything. I had only to press the pedal and push the paper onto the pad. On a pale orange ground I was now to impose a sort of violet.
I grew hypnotized by the sound of the wheel and the machine that was set in motion by the pressure I put on the pedal. I could hear, whenever I paused, Sain's voice, "If Nehru were practical, let him disown the Congress. Why should you undertake projects which you can't afford?
Anyway, in 10 years what are we going to do with all the steel?" There was a lull. I wondered if they were suddenly struck dumb.
I heard the shuffling of feet. I felt relieved that the third plan was done with. Now an unusual thing happened.
The curtain stirred, an edge of it lifted, and the monosyllabist's head peeped in. There must be some extraordinary situation to make him do that. His eyes bulged.
"Someone to see you," he whispered. "Who is he? What does he want?"
"I don't know." Whispered conversation was becoming a strain. I shook my head and winked and grimaced to indicate to the poet that he should take himself out and say that I was not available.
The poet, ever a dense fellow, did not understand but kept blinking UII intelligently. Then his head suddenly vanished, and at the same moment a new head appeared in its place, a tanned face, large powerful eyes under thick eyebrows, large forehead and a shock of unkempt hair over it, like a black halo. My first impulse was to cry out, "Whoever you may be, why don't you brush your hair down?"
The new visitor had evidently pushed or pulled aside the poet before showing himself to me. Before I could open my mouth, he asked, "You be Nataraj?" I nodded, and he came forward, practically tearing aside the curtain, an act that violated the sacred traditions of my press.
I said, "Why don't you kindly take a seat in the next room? I'll be with you in a moment." He paid no attention. He stepped forward, extending his hand.
I hastily wiped my fingers on a rag, muttering, "Sorry, discolored, been working." He gave me a hard grip. My entire hand disappeared into his fist. He was a large man, about 6 feet tall and quite slim proportionately, but his bull neck and hammer fist revealed his true stature.
"Shan't we move to the other room?" I asked again. "Not necessary."
"It's all the same to me," he said. "You are doing something, why don't you go on? It won't bother me."
He eyed my colored labels. "What are they?" I didn't want any eyes to watch my special color effects and how I achieved them. I moved to the curtain and parted it courteously for him.
He followed me. I showed him the Queen Anne chair. I sat in my usual place, on the edge of my desk, and now regained the feeling of being master of the situation.
I adopted my best smile and asked, "Well, what can I do for you, Mr. Vasu?" he said, and added, "I knew you didn't catch my name. You were saying something at the same time as I was mentioning my name."
I felt abashed to hear it, and covered it, I suppose, with another of those silly smiles. I checked myself suddenly, feeling angry with this man for creating so much uneasiness in my mind, asked myself, "Nataraj, are you afraid of this muscular fellow?" And said authoritatively, "Yes, as much as to indicate, you have wasted my time sufficiently, now say whatever you may want to say." He took from his inner pocket a wad of paper, searched for a handwritten sheet, and held it out to me.
500 copies of notepaper, the finest, and 500 visiting cards. I spread out the sheet without a word and read, "H. Vasu, M.A., taxidermist." I grew interested.
My irritation left me. This was the first time I had set eyes on a taxidermist. I said, assuming the friendliest tone, 500.
"Are you sure you need 500 visiting cards? Could you not print them 100 at a time? They'll be fresh."
"Why do you try to advise me?" he asked pugnaciously. "I know how many I need."
"I'm not printing my visiting cards in order to preserve them in a glass case." "All right, I can print 10,000 if you want." He softened at my show of aggressiveness.
Fine, that's the right spirit. If you'd like to have it done on original Heidelberg, look. I don't care what you do it on."
"I don't know what you are talking about." I understood the situation. Every other sentence was likely to bristle and prove provocative. I began to feel intrigued by this man.
I didn't want to lose him. Even if I wanted to be rid of him, I had no means of getting rid of him. He had sought me out, and I'd have to have him until he decided to leave.
I might as well be friendly. "Surely, whatever you like. It's my duty to ask, that's all."
"Some people prefer it." "What is it, anyway?" he asked, suddenly interested. I explained the greatness of Heidelberg and where it was.
He thought it over and suddenly called, "Nataraj, I trust you to do your best for me. I have come to you as a friend." I was surprised and flattered.
He explained, "I'm new to this place, but I heard about you within an hour of coming." He mentioned some obscure source of information. "Well, I never give a second thought to these things," he said.
"When I like a man, I like him, that's all." I wanted to ask about taxidermy. So I said, looking at his card, "Taxidermist? Must be an interesting job."
"Where is your office, or?" "Right here, I hope to make a start."
I was in Junagadh, you know the place, and there I grew interested in this art. I came across a master there, one Suleiman. When he stuffed a lion, Junagadh is one place where we have lions, he could make it look more terrifying than it would be in the jungle.
His stuffings go all over the world. He was a master, and he taught me the art. After all, we are civilized human beings, educated and cultured, and it is up to us to prove our superiority to nature.
Science conquers nature in a new way each day. why not in creation also? That's my philosophy, sir. I challenge any man to contradict me.
He became maudlin at the thought of Suleiman, his master, and sighed. He was a saint. He taught me his art sincerely.
Where did you get your MA? At Madras, of course. You want to know about me? I wonder what he would have done if I had said, no, I prefer to go home and eat my food.
He would probably have held me down and said, you'll damn well listen. I was educated in the Presidency College. I took my master's degree in history, economics, and literature.
That was in the year 1931. Then he had joined the civil disobedience movement against British rule, broken the laws, marched, demonstrated, and ended in jail. He went repeatedly to prison and once when he was released found himself in the streets of Nagpur.
There he met a Fakalwan at a show. That man could have a half-ton stone slab on his cheek and have it split by hammer strokes, he could snap steel chains, and he would hit a block of hard granite with his fist and pulverize it. I was young then, his strength appealed to me.
I was prepared to become his disciple at any cost. I introduced myself to the Falwan. He remained thoughtful for a while and then went on, I learned everything from this master. The training was unsparing.
He woke me up at 3 o'clock every morning and put me through exercises. And he provided me with the right diet. I had to eat 100 almonds every morning and wash them down with half a SCR of milk. 2 hours later 6 eggs with honey. At lunch chicken and rice, at night vegetables and fruit.
Not everyone can hope to have this diet, but I was lucky in finding a man who enjoyed stuffing me like that. In 6 months I could understudy for him. The first time I banged my fist on the century-old door of a house in Lucknow, the 3-inch panel of seasoned teak splintered.
My master patted me on my back and cried with tears of joy in his eyes, "For you are growing on the right lines, my boy." 0.9 inches in a few months I could also snap chains, twist iron bars, and pulverize granite. We traveled all over the country and gave our shows at every market fair in the villages and town halls in the cities, and he made a lot of money. Gradually he grew flabby and lazy and let me do everything.
They announced his name on the notice, but actually I did all the twisting and smashing of stone, iron, and whatnot. When I spoke to him about it, he called me an ungrateful dog and other names and tried to push me out. I resisted, and Vasu laughed at the recollection of this incident. I knew his weak spot and hit him there with the edge of my palm with a chopping movement, and he fell down and squirmed on the floor.
I knew he could perform no more. I left him there and walked out and gave up the strong man's life once for all. You didn't stop to help him?
I asked. I helped him by leaving him alone, instead of holding him upside down and rattling the teeth out of his head. Oh, no, I cried, horrified.
You couldn't do that. Why not? I was a different man now, not the boy who went to him for charity.
I was stronger than he. After all, he taught you how to be strong. He was your guru, I said, enjoying the thrill of provoking him. Damn it all.
He cried. He made money out of me, don't you see? But he also gave you 6 eggs a day, and how much milk and almond was it?
He threw up his arms in vexation. Oh, you will never understand these things, Nataraj. Don't talk of all that.
You know nothing, you have not seen the world. You know only what happens in this miserable little place. If you think this place miserable, why do you choose to come here?
I was nearer the inner door. I could dash away if he attempted to grab me. Within this brief time, familiarity was making me rash and headstrong. I enjoyed taunting him.
You think I have come here out of admiration for this miserable city? Know this, I'm here because of Mempi Forest and the jungles in those hills. I'm a taxidermist.
I have to be where wild animals live. And I added. He appreciated my joke and laughed.
You are a wise guy, he said admiringly. You haven't told me yet why or how you became a taxidermist, I reminded him. He said.
Don't get too curious. Let us do business first. When are you giving me the visiting cards? He asked.
Tomorrow? He might pulverize granite, smash up his guru with a slicing stroke, but where printing work was concerned, I was not going to be pushed. I got up and turned the sheets of a tear-off calendar on the wall. You could come tomorrow and ask me.
I'll be able to discuss this matter only tomorrow. My staff is out today. At this moment my little son Babu came running in, crying, "Appa," and halted his steps abruptly on seeing a stranger.
He bit his nails, grinned, and tried to turn and run. I shot out my hand and held him. He was friendly with the usual crowd at my press, but this stranger's presence somehow embarrassed him.
I knew why he had come. It must be either to ask for a favor such as permission to go out with his friends or to deliver a message from his mother. "What is it?" I asked.
"Mother says, aren't you coming home for food? She is hungry." "So am I said, and if I were mother I wouldn't wait for father."
"Understand me? Here is a gentleman with whom I am engaged on some important business. You know what he can do?"
My tone interested Babu, and he looked up expectantly. Vasu made a weary gesture, frowned, and said, "Oh, stop that, Mr. Nataraj. Don't start at all. I don't want to be introduced to anyone."
"Now, you go away, boy," he said authoritatively. "He is my son," I began. "I see that," Vasu said indifferently, and Babu wriggled himself free and ran off.
Vasu did not come next day, but appeared again 15 days later. He arrived in a jeep. "Long time you have been away," I said.
"You thought you were rid of me?" he asked, and, thumping his chest, "I never forget." "And I never remember," I said. Somehow this man's presence roused in me a sort of pugnacity.
He stepped in, saw the Queen Anne chair occupied by the poet, and remarked half-jokingly, "That's my chair, I suppose." The poet scrambled to his feet and moved to another seat. That's better," Vasu said, sitting down.
He smiled patronizingly at the poet and said, "I haven't been told who you are." I'm a teacher in that school." "What do you teach?" he asked relentlessly.
"Well, history, geography, science, English, well, anything the boys must know." An all-rounder," Vasu said. I could see the poet squirming.
He was a mild, inoffensive man who was unused to such rough contacts. But Vasu seemed to enjoy bothering a mild man like that. I rushed in to his rescue.
I wanted to add to his stature by saying, "He is a poet." "He is nominally a teacher, but actually, I never read poetry." "No time," said Vasu promptly and dismissed the man from his thoughts. He turned to me and asked, "Where are my cards?"
I had a seasoned answer for such a question. "Where were you this whole fortnight?" "Away, busy."
"So was I said. "You promised to give me the cards, when?" I asked.
"Next day," he said. I told him that there had been no such promise. He raised his voice and I raised mine.
He asked finally, "Are we here on business or for a fight? If it's a fight, tell me. I like a fight."
"Can't you see, man, why I'm asking for my cards? But don't you see that we have our own business practice? I always adopted we whenever I had to speak for the press."
"What do you mean by that?" he asked aggressively. "We never choose the type and stationery for a customer. It must always be the customer's responsibility."
"You never told me that," he cried. "You remember I asked you to come next day. That was my purpose."
"I never say anything without a purpose. Why couldn't you have mentioned it on the same day?" "You have a right to ask," I said, feeling it was time to concede him something.
The poet was looking scared by these exchanges. He was essaying to get out. But I motioned him to stay.
"Why should this poor man be frightened out?" "You have not answered my question," said Vasu. "Why couldn't you have shown me samples of type on the first day itself?"
I said curtly, "Because my staff was out." "Oh," he said, opening his eyes wide. "I didn't know you had a staff."
I ignored his remark and shouted, "Sastri, please bring those ivory card samples and also the 10-point copper plate." I told Vasu grandly, "Now you can indicate your preferences, and we will try to give you the utmost satisfaction."
Sastri, with his silver-rimmed glasses on his nose, entered, bearing a couple of blank cards and a specimen type book. He paused just for a second, studying the visitor, placed them on the table, turned, and it disappeared into the curtain. "How many are employed in this press?"
Vasu asked. This man's curiosity was limitless and recognized no proprieties. I felt enraged.
Was he a labor commissioner or something of that kind? I replied, "As many as I need. But, the present-day labor conditions are not very encouraging."
But Mr. Sastry is very dependable, he has been with me for years. I handed him the cards and said, you will have to choose. These are the best cards available now.
I handed him the type book. Tell me what type you like. That paralyzed him.
He turned the cards between his fingers, he turned the leaves of the type book, and cried, I'm damned if I know what I want. They all look alike to me. What is the difference, anyway?
This was a triumph for me. Vasu, the printing business is an intricate one. That's why we don't take the responsibility in these matters.
Oh, please do something and print me my cards, he cried, exasperated. All right, I said grandly. I'll do it for you, if you trust me.
I trust you as a friend, otherwise I would not have come to you. Actually, I said, I welcome friends, not customers. I'm not a fellow who cares for money.
If anyone comes to me for pure business, I send them over to my neighbor and they are welcome to get their work done cheaper and on a better machine. Original Heidelberg. Oh, stop that original Heidel, he cried impatiently. I want to hear no more of it.
Give me my cards. My business arrangements are waiting on that, and remember also 500 letterheads.